Um, Good morning, everyone. I will talk about the current state of Armenian typefaces. This is a research project that I developed during my master in typeface design at Yale University last year. It's basically an investigation about the notable changes of Armenian typefaces that occur due to the phenomenon of Latinization of a traditional script. I will focus on three main issues. The first one is the Latinization of Armenian. The second one is the lack of Armenian phone families. And the third issue that I would like to talk about is the italic. So I will show how the italic usually is designed, and even if there is a kind of a lack of models to do that. I want to start showing you this picture that for me is quite meaningful because it shows a bit how Armenia look like. Well, actually this is Yerevan, is the capital of Armenia. We can see that there are these really huge building that belong to the Soviet architecture, and this is meaningful, in my opinion, because Armenia was under Soviet occupation for about 34 years. Moreover, I can say that Armenia is a kind of isolated country. It's at the border with Georgia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Russia. And it doesn't really have a lot of good relation with its neighbors. So for this reason I can say it's a bit an isolated country. However, in the last years Armenian built a strong relation with Europe. And we can actually see from these images that in veranda and street signs there are both Latin and Armenian scripts that work together, so we can see how there is this Western influence, and there is here on the first image on your left, we can see that there are some Latin letters that are introduced into the Armenian script, so you can recognize, for example, letter R and S, and this is not actually the right shape. I will show this later. However, is it possible to find in the city also this kind of lettering? So this is a hand-painted canvas poster made with brush. So there are still this kind of Eastern model. This is another example. This is a lattice engraved on stone plaques. They were called Armenian incision from the 17th century. So there is this kind of dichotomy and duplicity in Armenia, in which there is this will to become closer to the Western, and on the other side to want to maintain the typical tradition. But let's move to the issue of the Latinization. What Latinization means? Latinization is defined as the adaptation or acquisition of Latin features in other scripts. Basically, for Armenian, we have shapes that have been altered in weight and proportions, X-side has been increased, descendants have been shortened, and termin has been subordinated to Western choices. I will show now really briefly two styles. This is the Notre-Dame style. Is basically a cursive style, minuscule, used mainly to annotate at the margin of the text. And this is the Bologir style. That it was a style used as body text with low contrast. Descendants and ascendants have uniform height and slope. Basically, Armenian script remained the same for many years. Actually, I can say that a big change happened at the beginning of the 19th century. In fact, we can see that for the first time, this is the first publication, it's a journal, 1956. There is the design of a first Armenian upright, so this is really a novelty. Moreover, we can notice that some letters were Latinized. So, as we saw before in the sign writing at the beginning, you have the letter right that was substituted by R, the letter T by S, and the letter H is built just by flipping the second letter. So basically, this is wrong. And in the last example, we can see how the letter T is built on a Latin letter P. Another example in which there is a kind of example of how Armenian script has been Latinized is shown here. This is an example of style proposed by an Armenian type designer that worked during the Soviet occupation, and he shows some examples that recall the style used in the Latin. So he showed different kind of serifs and sans serif, and this is a bit strange because we don't have serif and sans serif in Armenian. We can talk about in-stroke and out-stroke, so it's a really strange thing. But let's move to the current state of Armenian typefaces. I will show what's going on nowadays basically in publications. So we'll show some examples from newspapers and magazines and children's books gathered in 2012 from Yerevan. So what we can see, we can notice is that there is a certain homogeneity in the choices of typefaces. And mainly there are typefaces that are downloadable for free from the internet. So this is a bit of a problem because first of all they are updated. Second of all is that they were designed by people that at the time they were not really knowledgeable about type design because they were more engineers than type designers. And third is that they were designed basically to match the Latin. So they acquired basically features from the Latin. So we can see that they match the Latin in color, in X height, in dimension, proportion, and serif. Especially in newspaper, there is another problem, is that one of saving space. So we know that in order to increase legibility, usually we increase the X height, reduce ascendance and descendance, and that's what we can see here in this example. But in Armenian, ascendants and descendants are really important to discern letters between the others. And nowadays, the ratio 1 on 1 on 1 and the ratio 1 on 2 on 1 are ratios that are basically accepted. But we can see in this image that is not the same. Another example is this one, in which we can see how the ending part of the letter da was brought to such an extent to affect the legibility. Or we can find something like this, in which we have two letters that collapse with each other, and they create some letters that are not really legible or recognized anymore. Basically, the research conducted on magazines show a bit of the same issues that I already saw in newspapers. So again, there is like the Arial typeface that is mainly used. There is not really a dynamism in the layout of magazine. The same typeface is used for body text and as well for subheadings, so they use color just to give a bit of more dynamism. I will talk now about the second issue, that is the one of italic. Slanted or Roman is still a common practice nowadays. Usually this solution is not considered a correct typography practice. And we can see how already in 1955 there was this example. This is from a book specimen in which you show how an italic was drawn on a grid based incline of 30 degrees. However, we can find a sample of slope italic. It's referred to style basically that use slanted upright forms but with optical corrections. So we can see that letters were slightly condensed and some curves of lowercase letters were corrected. Because the Armenian basically, it was usually written at an angle of 16.5 degrees, so my question is, which is really the right solution for Italic? Does it make sense to have a slope one or a slanted one if already this is an example of how it was originally? So another solution could be maybe a cursive, a proper one. So it refers to styles that use different forms from the right, inspired by informal handwriting. These are two examples. The first one is the Rec from Kaja Capelliana, and the second one is the Mir by Ben Jones. Here there is an application of a rec for a magazine, and it shows how the italic is used differently than we usually use. So we can see how it is not used indeed in sentence emphasis, but as headlines and row quotes to create a rhythm. So why is it so wrong? Is it not right to have a slanted italic? Which one is the issue? So this is basically why it's not so right, is because we have we can find things like this in which punctuation marks overlap with adjacent letters or letters that collide with each other. I will now show the last issue, that is the lack of Armenian font families. We can see how there are mathematical signs or figures that are replaced with the corresponding characters from other fonts, and we can see how they don't match the Armenian fonts neither in proportion, weights, or style. And the same thing it happens when we have another non-Latin along with the Armenian font. We know that Russian basically is the second language that is spoken in Armenian, and so we have a lot of bilingual publication. In this case, we can see how the Cyrillic is monolinear, the strokes are thinner than in the Armenian typeface, and in this case, because the Cyrillic has really few letters that go above and below the baseline, and the white counters of letters of this typeface, the Armenian look quite smaller than the Cyrillic one. This is another sample of bilingual text. This is a children's books, and again we can see that they used the Arial typeface. So we can think that there are not really a lot of Armenian speakers, and that maybe they're just in Armenia, but this is not true, because we can see that there are 10 million Armenian around the world. This is because of the diaspora phenomenon, so it is important to have fonts that can support the needs of everyone. I will finish showing what's happening in headlines. And in the headlines we can see that we have a bit of the same phenomenon that it happened for for what we saw before in magazine and newspaper in the text. Computer distortion and manipulation. We have computer distortion and manipulation of existing typefaces. We have effects such as extended, shadowing, condensing, and thick outlines around letters are applied. Again, this is an example of an Armenian newspaper, and we can see that there is in both in subheadline and body text, we have the usage of the same typeface. There's not really a lot of dynamism. There is a background, color background, and so on. Another problem is that due to the limited character set, we can find this kind of issue. So in this case, we have a question mark that look quite lighter. So it might be that probably this glyph has been substituted by the glyph of another typeface, or that they belong to another weights. In this last example, these are mastheads from different newspapers. We can see in the first two images how they are closer to the Western model. So again, we have two different examples, Western and traditional. And here we show how there is also another way to Latinize Armenian. So for example, in the first image, we can see how the letter A is built by combining the capital U and Q from the Latin. And here, as I saw before, this is a kind of, it recalls a bit this Armenian decorative type. So what I would like to say, just to conclude, is that I think that we need for Armenian to look back at models. We need to preserve the characteristic of the script without subordinating it to the Latin script. And if there are no models to follow, so it would be kind of good to, for example, as we saw for the italic, to try to understand how the italic can be used, what could be the best solution, and so on. My last point is that there is the need, as we saw, to nowadays to design new to design Armenian as font in a font family, and that's it. Thanks.
Any questions?
On one of your examples, I see the small caps. How it used in Armenian and how it's support in new fonts.
Where did you see small cap? Sorry.
Here. Up.
On the left.
This is not
This is
lower cases.
this is a bit a tricky thing, because at the beginning I thought they were small caps, but I discovered that they are not small caps.
So, thank you.
You mentioned publication in Paris. You said 1856 and 1857. I was wondering, I know from 1857 and shortly thereafter there's various printers using that sort of style, and several were associated with Arami. Do you know who published and printed 1856 work?
Yeah, actually, the first publication of this journal was in 1855, and it was the type was casted and printed by Yannick Aramian. That was printed at Open his press in Paris during the time.
Sorry, what was the name of it?
Yannick Aramian.
Oh, it is Aramian.
Yeah.
And that's a serial publication?
It is. Yeah, I think they. I don't want to say it wrong. I think they publish like around 5 numbers, I think.
Does the 1855 version also have the new type?
Yes, yes, yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, a question regarding the upright versus the italic. Would you say for the generation raised in the last 20 years, do most of the writers consider the upright as a normal or the italic as a normal?
Sorry, can you repeat what are you using?
Readers that have grown up in the past 20 years,
Yes.
do they consider the leaning script as the norm or the upright as the text norm?
Okay. Well, basically, if I have to say, there are 2 different trends. Like, there's not just, okay, the upright Armenian is the right one, is the best one, or the slanted one is the best one,
No, my question is simply the norm. What people perceive to be as the most...
That's the thing I'm saying. There is not really, in my opinion, from what I saw, there is not really a norm, because you can see that nowadays there are Armenian that are upright and Armenian that are slanted. So they use both. They recognize both. Probably I don't know if I could say that they might prefer the upright version, but just because it looked modern. But we can see designers that are designing both things. So upright or slanted is not one is wrong or right.
My question isn't about right or wrong.
I don't know I don't know nowadays, like, both of them are recognized. So
would you say that 100 years ago one of them was more common than the other?
yeah, well, as I saw, the Bologir style was the style that was used since the beginning. So I think that you can recognize that, like, the one that is best perceived.
Was that leaning or upright?
No, it was an incline. Yes.
Thank you.